Yes, hello everyone. My name is Kilichi Gospel and you're welcome to yet another interesting section. You see, that stormy, beautiful picture you see on social platform is made up due to certain factors. If you want to join me through the journey of Photoshop, let's dive in and see one of those factors that actually determine a good picture. Today we are going to be looking at photography and exposure triangle. I would love you to please subscribe if you find this topic very interesting. So without further ado, let's jump into photography. Photography is the control and management of light. It is the art of capturing light. It goes through your lens and then your shutter and then is recorded in your sensor. We measure light by what is called stop of light. Let's understand the concept of exposure triangle. This is a technique that determines how much of light we have in our images. And they are namely shutter speed, aperture, ISO. So let's jump into the shutter speed. When you take a photo, light comes through the lens, hits the sensor, hits the shutter rather, and then hits the sensor. This concept controls the amount of time your shutter is open. Now let's look at it this way. Whenever you take a photograph, right, your shutter, which is that you detach your lens, there's that mirror-like stuff inside. Some cameras have the mirror, some don't have. However, the amount of time or the period of time that shutter is exposed to receiving light, this is also measured in seconds and fractions. So we have those measurements to be 1 over 800, 1 over 250, 1 over 500, 1 over 100. So that means if you want to capture objects that are on motion, you are supposed to set your shutter to a high number, depending, maybe particularly when you're in an event that happens to be a football match, a car racing, a horse racing. Your shutter speed is supposed to be taken high so as to capture moving objects, because that activity is marked with motion. People are moving to and fro. I hope you get the concept. But objects that are still, that are in a static position, you could use 1 over 100, you could use 1 over 50, and so on and so forth. So the shutter is this thing in front of your sensor that opens at a click and allows light to come into the camera. Whenever you press your shutter button, it goes on, you hear the sound. Now for you to freeze a moving object, it is determined by your shutter speed. Jump into aperture. What is aperture? Aperture is that opening in your lens. Aperture is that little hole in your lens. It is what receives light and what resists light. How open your aperture is also going to determine how much of light you have in your shot, and how close your aperture is going to determine how much of light you also have in your shot. So this is the eyes up, or this is the size of the opening when adjusting your lens, and this aperture is symbolized in f-stops. When you look at your camera, you're going to see a symbol of f-stop. The lower your f-stop, the more the light. The higher your f-stop in terms of number now, like 1, 2, 3, that's what I mean. The lower your f-stop in number is going to determine how much of depth of field your image is going to have. What depth of field means is how much concentration or emphasis you have on a particular object while isolating the others. So let's say amongst many eggs, you have one egg your image is capturing, your camera rather is capturing, while the others are extremely blown out. You get? So there are some lenses that has the aperture of as much as 1.4, some as much as 1.8. Now the lower, which is 1.4, 1.8, the lower the number, the more depth of field and the more light your camera receives. The higher the number, which is like f12, f16, the less light, and in a way the more darker your images are. But now the trick behind this is that it doesn't mean that because you're using f16 makes your image bad, or you're using f1.4 makes your image right. What f-stop basically entails is that for the photographer, you already have an idea of what you want to achieve. You have that thing you want to create in your head. So this is just giving you an idea of how to play around with your exposure triangles. ISO, this is the sensitivity of your camera sensor. The higher your ISO, the more brighter your image. The lower your ISO, the less brighter your image. Now when you're in an enclosed environment, the building, the weather is extremely not fair, you would need more light. So what this means is that the higher the ISO, the more the light. The lower the ISO, the less the light. You get? So if you're in dark areas, you might want to increase your ISO to as much as 500, 800, 600, 1000, 1500, 2000, and so on and so forth. But you see here, there is a disadvantage to increasing this, because you might say, yeah, this place is dark, let me just increase my ISO all high. But you then notice that while you're increasing your ISO, you're seeing things like noise, you're seeing things like artifacts, you're seeing things like grains on it, particularly when you're using a crop sensor camera. You notice that. But on a full frame, I think you go to as much as 2000, 2500 without really noticing grain in your images. But if you go way beyond, you go higher, you're going to notice it. So you might want to, when playing around with your exposure triangles, try to keep them in a moderate state where your shutter speed is not set in a way that is conflicting with your aperture and your ISO, and your ISO is not overly high where your picture is looking all blown out and pale and flat, right? So you might want to maintain a consistency across board. Now the question you would want to ask yourself when you handle a camera is, for your shutter speed, do I want to freeze a moving object? For your aperture, what particular object do I want to be more pronounced than the others? And for your ISO, how much of light do I want in this image? These three concepts is going to help you achieve great pictures. Thank you very much. If you find this interesting, please, I would love you to share and hit the subscribe button.